The submarine journey from Europe to Southeast Asia was extremely dangerous. It was a 90-day journey under the ocean, and with the Second World War going on. But Netaji seemed to be quite calm. The cabin in the submarine was very narrow, very small, but he was all the time working, dictating to Abid Hassan, who was accompanying him, dictating his thoughts, what he will say in speeches when he reaches Southeast Asia. One day, by mistake, the submarine had surfaced a little bit, and a British destroyer had spotted the submarine, and it came charging against the submarine, and the submarine was trying to get under the water again, and there was a terrible sort of confusion going on with the submarine going this side, that side. Now, but Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose was dictating to Abid Hassan calmly whatever he was saying, and when the confusion stopped, the captain of the submarine said that we should learn from our guest how to be calm when you are in the midst of such a confusion. In spite of such adventures, they went on. Sometimes in the night, when the submarine surfaced, Netaji and Abid Hassan would come up and sit on the roof of the submarine, and daytime, of course, they had to be underneath. So 90 days passed, and they reached the Indian Ocean. There it had been planned a Japanese submarine will come from the other side, and Netaji will be transferred from the German submarine to the Japanese submarine. The two submarines came face to face, but that day the weather was terrible. There were huge waves on the Indian Ocean, and it was almost impossible to transfer Netaji. So a rubber dinghy was used. Netaji got into that rubber dinghy, and with a rope bound to it, somehow he was taken to the Japanese submarine. But after he arrived at the Japanese submarine, he felt even a little better, because that submarine was a little bigger than the other one. And also the food in the submarine tasted a little bit, Asian and not European anymore. So the Japanese submarine took Netaji to a place called Sabang near Sumatra, where he was received by Japanese officials. Yamamoto was there to receive him, and from Sabang he of course flew to Tokyo. After he reached Tokyo, he met all the top officials there, including Shigemitsu, who was the foreign minister, Sugiyama, who was the naval chief. But the most important meeting was, of course, with General Tojo, who was the prime minister at that time. Tojo was very much impressed when he met Netaji. He was impressed by his personality, by the way he talked, about the freedom struggle of India. Tojo was extremely impressed. So, after a few days, in the Japanese parliament, Prime Minister Tojo declared in the parliament itself that Japan will give all help to the Indian freedom struggle. This was a great step indeed in Southeast Asia. Now, so work had to be begun. From Tokyo, Netaji came to Singapore. In Tokyo, he also met the veteran revolutionary Rashbihari Bose, who was already there, and he was leading the Indian Independence League in Southeast Asia. Rashbihari Bose accompanied Netaji when he came from Tokyo to Singapore. Singapore had fallen to the Japanese, and the British had actually surrendered 45,000 soldiers of the British Indian Army there. Now, Netaji always had in his mind this plan that he must somehow reach the Indian Army which worked under the British Indian Army. They were very loyal, but their loyalty must be changed. No longer loyal to His Majesty the King, but they must be told that they should be loyal to their motherland. Now, when they were surrendered in Singapore, General Fujiwara had taken the surrender, and he had announced even there that if some of you or all of you wanted to fight for your country's freedom, you are free to do so. And there was a great enthusiasm when General Fujiwara announced this. Anyway, when Netaji arrived, the whole atmosphere in Singapore was sort of electrified. All these soldiers, they were inspired by the presence of Netaji in Singapore itself. Now, Singapore happens to be a very important place in our history of freedom struggle. There in Singapore, Netaji was given a house, a two-storied house on Maya Road, where he lived along with his other colleagues who worked with him. And also he was given an office in Chancery Lane. And these are all, spots in Singapore which are connected with the history of our freedom struggle. The Maya Road house, the Chancery Lane office, and after his arrival in Singapore, he addressed those British Indian Army soldiers on 5th of July 1943. And Netaji, as he stood there, he said, "This is the proudest day of my life. I am announcing the birth of the Liberation Army of India." He said 5th of July was his proudest day. And as I said, there was great enthusiasm among the soldiers. So these British Indian Army actually had become the Indian National Army, or Azad Hind Fauj, as it came to be known. Other steps followed after this. Netaji decided to form a provisional government of Free India in Singapore. There is a beautiful place in Singapore, Cathay Theatre. It is still there. So there was a big meeting in the Cathay Theatre where he announced that the provisional government of Free India was formed. He himself read the oath he took as the supreme commander of the Azad Hind Fauj and the head of the provisional state. It was a very moving ceremony in Cathay Theatre, Singapore. And of course, there was a cabinet to work. There was S.A. Iyer, who was the publicity minister. He took it was a war cabinet, so naturally others were taken, like General Shahnawaz Khan. It was a war cabinet. But Netaji also took, there was a woman minister in the cabinet, Lakshmi Swaminathan Saigal. Netaji had decided that Indian women must fight shoulder to shoulder along with the men for the struggle for freedom. So he had already announced a women's wing of the Azad Hind Fauj. It was called the Rani of Jhansi Regiment. And Lakshmi Swaminathan at that time, later Saigal, she was in charge of that. And her deputy was a very young girl, Janaki Thevar Ati Nahappan. She was only 16-year-old, and she has herself said how she came on a cycle to listen to a meeting where Subhas Chandra Bose would be speaking. She listened to the speech and was very much moved. And when Subhas Chandra Bose said, "Please help me, all of you must help me in every way," total mobilization, he said. We also need money to run the war, and women gave all their ornaments in the hands of their leader. Janaki Thevar, a 16-year-old girl, went up to him and took out her earrings and bangles and gave it to Netaji. Now nobody knew about this. Her parents came to know about it next day when the picture came out in the newspapers. And then she said she wanted to join the Rani of Jhansi regiment, went over to Singapore and became the deputy commander to Lakshmi Swaminathan. All these were very important steps that were taken in Singapore itself. So Singapore plays a very important role in the history of our freedom struggle. We had the Free India government out of our country, but it was functioning. We had a cabinet, we had an army. Now what we needed was territory. A government must have a territory, a state. Now by that time, Andaman and Nicobar were already under the Japanese, and the Japanese handed over Andaman and Nicobar to the provisional government of Azad Hind. And Netaji went and visited in December Andaman and Nicobar, and he even renamed them Shahid and Swaraj. Andaman, as you know, is so much connected with our freedom struggle, because all our young men were sent to prison in Andaman, and they went to gallows there. They were all put to the gallows by the British at that time. So now the provisional government also had a territory. There was a governor looking after Andaman and Nicobar, governor who belonged to the provisional government of Azad Hind. So a proper government was already formed in Singapore. Now the war was raging, and it was time that the Azad Hind Fauj also joined the war. So the headquarters from Singapore was brought forward to Rangoon, and Netaji then had his headquarters at Rangoon, and all these Azad Hind Fauj sepoys, they went to the front from there. And the sepoys had said that sometimes Netaji came to say goodbye to them, gave them a little bit, maybe a little bit of a soap or just a handkerchief, but they were all so moved by that, and they all went forward to the, the war was going on almost at the border of India and Burma at that time. So, the Azad Hind Fauj joined the war there along with the Japanese army, of course. And then it was a great day for them, 18th of March, I think, yes, when they crossed the border and put their feet on Indian soil first. And it was a tremendous scene. They put the soil of India on their head and touched it, that they were now standing on Indian soil. But they had only just crossed the border, they must go forward. So the war went forward, and they conquered Kohima. One army went up to Kohima, another group came up to Imphal. Just 10 miles from Imphal, there is a place called Mairang, where Shaukat Malik raised the tricolor flag there. And it was a great day for them that the tricolor was now flying in so near Imphal, and Kohima was already there fallen. Now, this Indian National Army or Azad Hind Fauj had different brigades, and these brigades were named after the great leaders of Indian freedom struggle. One was, Netaji had named these brigades, Gandhi Brigade, Mahatma Gandhi's name, Nehru Brigade, Jawaharlal Nehru's name, Azad Brigade in the name of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, and there was also a Subhas Brigade there. Now, the army had reached Kohima, and the army had almost reached Imphal, because just 10 miles from Imphal, in a place called Mairang, Shaukat Malik of Azad Hind Fauj raised the Indian tricolor, and there was great jubilation there. That was April 1944. And Mairang, all the army officers have said that, even British army officers who have written later books, they have said Mairang saw one of the bloodiest battles of the Second World War. The story is that there were ghosts even after the war. There was so much death, and they did sort of puja and other things, the villagers. Well, that is a legend, but it is true that Mairang saw one of the most fierce war of the Second World War. Now, it was from April, May, June, July, all these areas were under the provisional government of Azad Hind. There is a pass there near Imphal called Technopole Pass, where they held their camp, and Netaji had given them the slogan, Delhi Chalo. Even General Fujiwara, who was there for some time, said that in the darkness of the night they could hear Chalo, Chalo, Delhi Chalo in Technopole Pass near Imphal. But you see, the position of the war was going through a change. America had entered the war along with the British. They were allies. And by the time of July, monsoon arrived in that area, terrible monsoon. And the Indian National Army and the Japanese Army did not have enough food. They were far away from their headquarters, so they did not have any food. And we know from what the ordinary sepoys of Azadin Fauj has written or told us that it was very, very difficult. For days together they had nothing to eat excepting some sort of weeds which they sort of boiled and ate. Sometimes they got a little bit of small fish, maybe in one of those canals or somewhere, and had it boiled with the grass, so to say. On the other hand, the American aeroplanes were dropping foodstuff all the time to the British Army, the Allies there. It became a very unequal war. So in July, the order came that they should retreat. Now, this retreat from Imphal was terrible, because already the soldiers were very weak without food. Then there was monsoon, there was malaria, there was disease everywhere. Many succumbed as they retreated on that road. Retreat from Imphal really and truly was a very pitiful thing to happen. Many died during this retreat. Anyway, they reached Moulmein, where Netaji came to see them and comforted them, and they were happy to see him. Netaji had asked Abid Hassan, who was also there in the retreat, that nobody is telling me how much you have suffered. You tell me, how was it? And Abid Hassan has said, I could not tell him really, but I said it was indeed somewhat difficult and could not say any more. Anyway, the retreat was there, and the way of the war went against the Azadin Fauj and the Japanese, and the Allies were gaining ground all the time. So a time came when Netaji himself must retreat from Rangoon, where his headquarters was. Netaji said, I will not leave Rangoon unless all my Rani of Jhansi girls, soldiers, are safe and retreated. It was a very difficult thing for the Japanese. They could give a car to Netaji, or they could do something for him, but to the whole Rani of Jhansi regiment, women, also other officers, it was not possible. So somehow a convoy of cars, trucks, etc., and they left Rangoon. Now this retreat from Rangoon also is another very terrible thing to happen. But the Rani of Jhansi girls were very happy. After all, Netaji was with them. So even when there is a river and they must cross the river, they took their rifles up on their heads and just crossed the river, walking into the water itself. They would be giggling. And others, officers like SAIR and others, they have said, what are the girls laughing about. Why are they giggling? They are so happy, although things were very, very bad. And actually during the day, when if there was light enough, they could not carry on the retreat. There was bombing going on, and sometimes they stopped somewhere and somehow had some food for Netaji and themselves, and again started that walk. So this was a terrible retreat, but all of them had said how they were inspired because Netaji himself was with them. He was also suffering as much as the women of the Rani of Jhansi regiment or the men of the Indian National Army. So the war went from bad to worse for the provisional government of Azad Hind. And then a terrible thing happened, as we all know. The Americans bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, and this was as you know, so many people who had nothing to do with the war, ordinary people, died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this is the first time that a new kind of bomb had fallen on them. They had no idea what it was like, but they understood that now there was no other way but to surrender. They have to surrender. So the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki made it imperative for Japan to come to the decision that they cannot carry any more and they must surrender. So 15th of August 1945, Japan surrendered in the war, and that brought a closer almost I am saying, to the Indian National Army and the provisional government of Azad Hind. But Netaji said that a freedom struggle never ends. So we are not surrendering, we will continue. Our freedom struggle will go on, he said. 15th of August 1945, after Japan's surrender, there was a whole night cabinet meeting at Netaji's Bayar Road residence in Singapore. What is to be done? You know, even in that moment, Netaji had ordered one of his officials, his name was Cyril John Tracy. He was an Anglo-Indian officer of the Indian National Army, that you have to build a memorial in Singapore commemorating the unknown soldiers of the Azad Hind Fauj who had laid down their life in this war. Can you manage it? Cyril John Tracy saluted Netaji and said, yes, we will do it. And all the others were just shocked and thinking, how will this man do it at this time? Anyway, you know, Cyril John Tracy did have a beautiful memorial on the waterfront of Singapore. That is a sad story though, because when Mountbatten occupied Singapore and landed, the first thing he did was to dynamite that memorial, and it came down. And they have even kept films, I mean the British had kept films that Azad Hind Fauj sepoys were standing there weeping when this came down. And The story is that one of them became hysterical and said in weeping that Mountbatten, you have done this to us today. One day you will be blown up as you have just blown up our memorial. Long afterwards, it is a tragic death that Mountbatten also had. He was blown over by the Irish long after this. But some of the officers of the INA said we had all forgotten this. But when he did die at the hands of Irish freedom people and was blown up, this story came back to our mind again. Anyway, the whole of the night they were discussing what to do now, because Netaji had said that this is a temporary defeat. We must not be heartbroken by it. His last order of the day is very beautiful that he gave to the soldiers. And what will he do? That was also a problem. There were many ideas in that cabinet meeting. Somebody said, Netaji himself had suggested that he might surrender in Singapore along with his army. But many people, his colleagues, did not like the idea. They said the British could do anything to Netaji. He could be shot, he could be humiliated. They did not want that. So what else? There was another plan that he could go to Bangkok and just go underground for some time in a monastery in Bangkok maybe, and come out when things had settled down a little bit. Looking back, it seems that would have been a good idea, but whatever it was, they decided that he must leave Singapore at once. So it was decided that next day they will leave Singapore and go to Saigon. And Netaji thought that he must carry on this war even if from some other country, some other soil somewhere, and he had thought of Manchuria at that time. So if he could go to Saigon, somehow to Manchuria, he can again start. So he did not accept the defeat, but he said he was going to fight again for India's freedom. So Muhammad Zaman Kiani, another officer of the Azad Hind Fauj, was asked to take charge of Singapore. They will come, when the British will arrive, it is Muhammad Zaman Kiani who will surrender to the British with whatever, or as many soldiers are there of the Azad Hind Fauj. And Netaji left next day, 16th of August. He came to Bangkok and then proceeded towards Saigon. What is to be, the last photograph that we have of Netaji is that he is coming down from the aeroplane at Saigon, 17th of August. They decided that he will go to Manchuria, and another big Japanese general was going there, so they could go together also. But in the plane, first they said there was no seat excepting one. They could offer one to Netaji. But all his colleagues there said, no, we are not going to let you go alone, at least one more. So after much struggle, the Japanese did try and said, okay, 2 seats were available. Netaji had to choose somebody. There were about 5 of them, ministers and officers of the INA. Abid Hassan was there, S.A. Iyer was there. Abid Hassan later told us that he even hoped that Netaji might choose him. He had come all the way in the submarine with him also. But Netaji at that time chose Habibur Rahman, who was senior to him, to go with him. And the Japanese promised that you go and your other officers like S.A. Iyer and Abid Hassan, we will send them in a different plane as soon as we can arrange something. So Habibur Rahman and Netaji took the plane from Saigon, and the plane had halted just for refueling at Taiwan. Taiwan is a small island, you know. Taipei is the city there, the capital there. So it had just got down there for refueling, and so now we have all the documents, what happened there, like Habibur Rahman was with him, others were there. They had a bit of a sandwich and things, and then again they got into the plane. Now Taiwan airstrip is a sort of a narrow airstrip, and as the plane took off, it had not even gone to a great height. Just after it took off, it crashed in the end of that runway itself. When it crashed, it caught fire, and Habib says that we could not get down from the plane, from the end of the plane. It was all stuck, we could not. So in front we saw the fire was raging already. But I said to Netaji, "Aage se nikliye, please get out." They had to get out somehow. So they somehow got out of the plane, and some died instantaneously, like the Japanese general who was going, instantaneous death in that crash, and quite a number of them, including Netaji, was terribly injured, and Habib also was injured. Now, they were within 10 minutes, of course, they were taken to the military hospital, Southgate Hospital of Taiwan, and the Japanese doctors there, they tried their best, but Netaji in spite of all their attempts, they could not do much. They also asked for an interpreter to come, so that whatever Netaji said could be interpreted. And the interpreter who came was known to Netaji. Whenever Netaji passed through Taiwan, he had interpreted Netaji before. So he came, and he said that I did interpret him. He was terribly injured because actually it was burn, 3rd-degree burn. But he said that first he said other officers will come after me, they must be looked after. Then he asked what happened to the Japanese general who was coming with me. That he had died in the crash was not told to him, it was kept a secret from him. Once he even asked for water. In Japanese he asked for meju, water. And last time he said, blood is rushing into my head. I am not feeling well. I want to sleep. And he closed his eyes. And the interpreter says that that was the last that he said. And he passed away in the evening, in the night of 18th of August in Taiwan. He said that Habibur Rahman knelt down and prayed and the Japanese nurses, doctors, they were all crying, weeping when it happened there. Well, but after the accident, when Habib and Netaji had just come out and were lying there, Netaji first said to Habib, you are not very hurt, I hope. He was himself so badly injured, but he was asking Habib, are you all right? And then he said to Habib, which was almost like his last message to his country. He said to Habib that when you go back to India, tell my countrymen that till the last breath of my life, akhre dam tak, that he had said, I had fought for India's freedom, and that struggle must go on, and I am telling you, India will be free. Nobody can keep India anymore under subjecthood, and India is going to be free very soon. He was saying this to Habib 18th of August 1945, and within 2 years actually, 47, 15th of August, India did become free. Now, whatever happened, we have to accept that for the Indian National Army, it was a military defeat. They were defeated. But Netaji had said that one day we will go to the Red Fort in Delhi and raise the Tiranga, the tricolor there. That was his plan. Now, all these soldiers of Indian National Army did reach Delhi and also the Red Fort, but not as a victorious army, unfortunately, but they arrived as prisoners of war. They were taken prisoners and they were brought there and kept there. But you see, even in defeat, actually they did something great for their country. It was a military defeat, but it turned out to be a political victory. The British, when they had brought all these officers there, they were wondering what to do, because you cannot try thousands and thousands of soldiers. So they did something which was very foolish. They picked up 3 Indian National Army officers, Shah Nawaz Khan, Saigal, P.K. Saigal, Prem Kumar Saigal, and Gurubaksh Singh Dhillon. One was a Muslim, one was a Hindu, another was a Sikh. The 3 they picked up, and they said they were going to hold a trial in Red Fort itself. And of course, they will either be shot or given life sentence or whatever. They are going to be punished, 3 of them. This was a very foolish decision on the part of the British of that time. And whole of India rose like one man from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, so to say, and they said they wanted the 3 officers freed. The trial went on there, and Bhulabhai Desai stood as the lawyer for the INA officers. Even Jawaharlal Nehru put on his his lawyer's black robe for once and came and stood there with them. So the whole of country, even Muslim League at that time, Indian National Congress, everybody stood behind them. And you see, when the war was going on, the British were very clever. Many people in India did not know what Netaji was doing, and very few heard his voice in the radio. Deep into the night, they would close their windows and doors and listen to Netaji speaking over the radio. This is Subhas Chandra Bose speaking, he said on the radio. So, but they were very few. Largely in India, nobody knew what was happening. But when the trial took place, the whole of India came to know. And Indians all over were very proud that we had actually a free India government. We had a cabinet, we had a supreme commander, so to say. And they said that they had arrived, they had crossed the border and come into Imphal and Kohima. All these inspired them very much. And the British understood that they can't do anything anymore. Whenever when first Netaji left India and went abroad, many people say, why did he go? Why did he go to Japan, Germany? Why did he go to Japan? Netaji had one thing in mind. He wanted to approach the British Indian army. They were very loyal to their British, but he wanted to break that loyalty and make them loyal to Mother India, in which he succeeded. And at that time, the British general here, Auchinleck, he said that we cannot rule India anymore because we have lost the loyalty of the army. It is with the Indian army that they ruled us for 200 years, so to say. And he said we can't do it anymore. And it is true, because there was already a revolt in the Navy in Bombay at that time. The Navy revolt was there. Even in Barakpur, the army quarters here in Bengal, the army also went into revolt. So the British understood that they cannot keep India under control anymore, and they have to leave. So in that way we can say that Netaji's government and Netaji's Indian National Army played such a role in the last war of independence that we fought there, that the British had to leave. And the Indian independence was hastened. There is no doubt about that. The British had to leave. But of course, before they left, they gave us their last blow, partition. The country was partitioned. Independence came, but partition was there. But the contribution of the Indian National Army and what Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose did when he said that this is going to be our last struggle for freedom and we will win and India will be free before long, that came true. And that contribution is so great, and we have to remember all these who died on that war, you know. And Netaji had said, people will remember you, that you gave your life so that today's generation will be free and live in free India. So this brings to an end a glorious chapter in our freedom struggle that Netaji showed when he gave an alternative leadership, so to say, to Mahatma Gandhi. He had himself fought under Mahatma Gandhi in the non-cooperation movement, in the non-violent, non-cooperation movement, but when he took the reins in his own hand and gave an alternative leadership and waged a war against the British Empire. He succeeded, even though it was a military defeat. The political success was there, and it was a great political victory for Netaji and the Indian National Army.